welcome to Attribution Time. Today we have Camela. Camela, thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
As am I. I feel like it's rare to find someone as passionate about marketing attribution as myself, and yet I found you, and so I am super excited to dive into today. But for those who don't know you, why don't you give a quick intro?
Let's see here. Spent 15 years in operations, spanning sales, marketing, customer success. So RevOps before it was a thing, which really got me into the guts of all things revenue attribution. And then moved over to marketing. And then I ended up doing marketing for an attribution company and also overseeing revenue operations still because I can't escape it. So still in the thick of it.
That's kind of the beauty of revenue operations. The beauty and the curse is it's really intertwined in it all. Yep. You know, it's within the functions of everything that's going on. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So yeah, give us a little bit of background about your attribution journey. How did you get involved in it? How have you kind of become a voice in this space?
Oh boy. So I have seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and the really ugly. And of course, I started my journey in the very ugly. So early stage startups, we were starting to try to figure out some sort of attribution that didn't involve a form fill with raw text because that does not scale. I wasn't going to bring it up, but then it just happened. So it happened. So we were looking
it's out there now.
Yeah. So we're looking at Salesforce campaign relation, primary campaign, last touch, and it was a nightmare. So the business leaders wanted to know which department was responsible for sourcing which opportunities. And as you know, my friends, the correct answer is yes. Everybody should have something to do with it. And eventually we started trying to do attribution. We started with Full Circle Insights. It was a customer. Well, I inherited a couple instances of theirs at two different companies. Ended up building quite a bit on my own in like freemium SQL databases like MySQL and Postgres.
Yeah.
And then ended up working for CaliberMind, which is definitely it's very different than Full Circle Insights or what Salesforce has to offer. And on that trek, failed a couple times, succeeded more than I failed, but you know, hindsight's 2020. I can look back and I see a lot of areas that led to those failures.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in it's probably relatable for most people in their attribution journey or even where they're at right now. It's one of two things. You have the marketing automation platform that just has that single source field that's associated to like first touch or whatever, or maybe last touch, but it's you know, a single source of attribution. And then more often than not, most people are in either HubSpot, which has some form of attribution, or Salesforce, the behemoth of Salesforce, and they're trying to do, as you mentioned, attribution by campaign. And then I think that's where Full Circle kind of came in, as just like blew up the idea of how do we just use the campaign and the structure of the campaign. And anyone with a kind of a baseline of that, I think it's a blessing and a curse. And it's not a bash on Full Circle. It's just Salesforce is limited. It's not meant to do that. So when it's all built within that ecosystem, it becomes really challenging. And I'm curious though, what was it that you were doing in the SQL databases? Like, were you actually like writing some formulas? Were you pulling from like multiple data sources? Like, give me a little bit of a rundown what you were doing there.
So it had more to do with multiple data sources and then trying to figure out how to. So every company I've been at, the main goal has been departmental attribution. And as you know, like one of the primary complaints we had with Full Circle is it's campaign based. So of course, marketing is going to get the majority of, and I hate this word, credit, because they use the majority of those campaigns, even when you force salespeople to choose something, and they hate being forced to choose something. So Early days, I was using that database to incorporate signals from partners, salespeople, and trying to get some kind of view. I think there are some things that Full Circle opened up that were a good thing. So, for example, we were no longer totally stuck with salespeople doing data entry on opportunity contact roles, because campaign influence is so limited. But time and time again, and this happened all the time when I was consulting, when you really talk to the CMO or the VP of marketing, what they're being pressured to do by the board, by the rest of the executive team, is what's your proportion of pipeline and bookings? Because they want to know, sales is always going to complain about lead quality, marketing is always going to complain about sales. What's the truth? Is there some way to do some kind of tiebreaker? And that's why I got into the database world.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you said that, it just makes me think of that. I think that's where we're at now. Like we had the CaliberMinds, we had the visibles or measures, we had these systems that were saying, hey, we'll build on top of it. And we basically function as your database. We work as a data, like this. So they're taking it, they're extracting it, and they're trying to do all that heavy lifting that you were probably doing of like, okay, these departmental, or how do we just segment these data points and do it for the customer, right? So again, like any software, someone could probably build it because someone clearly did. It's just to alleviate the time and to save you money by just plugging it in and having it done.
Yeah.
But
I think
ahead.
there's a curse in there too, like you alluded to earlier, in that I see everybody has an agenda and everybody wants to be represented, and they see it as this definite division of dollars, which is so problematic on so many levels. And they're not taking into consideration, like it's never a cross-functional project, which drives me crazy if you're trying to get departmental attribution, because you need to have the conversation of, okay, what do you think the most high value touch points are? Because it's probably not going to be a blog post visit. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good call out, right? Because who's usually buying the attribution tool?
Marketing, the CMO.
Marketing, right? And so all these tools were designed to say, hey, we'll help you do exactly what you want to show. That's a bad place to start with attribution at any time, right? It's just not the right place, not the right move.
It's like letting marketing define MQL.
Right.
It should not be a unilateral thing. It needs to be a cross-functional collaboration. Yeah,
that's such a great definition of it, right? Because the MQL everyone can relate to. Not everyone's doing multi-touch attribution, but if marketing's defining that, you're not hitting your goals. You're not hitting your metrics, right? That's just not working for you. Yeah, good call out. So within, like we talked about first touch, last touch, and some of those dynamics, I'm curious to get your insights, and I'm just excited to get your reaction from it. Alone is self-reported attribution. Tell me your thoughts on that.
It's so problematic.
Yeah.
Can you remember what you had for breakfast yesterday?
Well, I eat the same thing every day, so that's not a good question for me.
Okay, that's kind of cheating. That's kind of cheating. I do the same thing, but chances are really good. Like, if you look at all of the statistical research on false convictions for murder, the majority of those are eyewitness led. And humans are fallible. Our reality is very subjective. It's not objective, and we're going to forget, and that's okay. I think it is valuable to ask people where they found you, because that's the thing that sticks out in their mind. Is it really the thing? I don't know. Is the last thing they did before creating an opportunity more important than the other things? Probably not. It's problematic. And the reason why we stopped doing it, it's so funny because this always gets recommended. I'm like, yeah, that worked 15 years ago. We really went after it. And then we realized that raw text is really hard to analyze in a systematic way. That
Mhm.
may change with AI. That may
Sure.
change with AI, but
You can process it a lot faster for sure, but nonetheless,
right.
it's going to still be problematic because people not only can they remember what they didn't have yesterday, they also can't type. I'm one of
Right.
them, right? It's just not.
Well,
It's like,
yeah, there's recency bias. There's all of the different ways we can say the same thing in the English language. Oh, heaven forbid, German language. They have a word for everything. I guess
yeah,
it's more precise, but still.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I've read up on it quite a bit. I've I have swung the gamut of it. I was like, I'm totally anti self-reported. Then I came up to this side of like, I can see its place
Mhm.
within it, but it should never be a single source of it. What I think is interesting, there was a post, I can't remember by who, it's probably for the best, but you know, they they were a smaller market. And what he was saying was, as the head of marketing and running this organization, was just like, we just solely only do self-reported attribution. We've gotten rid of all this and that, and we've really cut down on our spend. And that's awesome. Like, hey, as someone who needs to make decisions about where to put your dollars, and you said, hey, we've been able to actually spend less and still just get the same amount of value or similar value. That's awesome. I'm all about that. But as you and I both know, having worked in this industry, paid advertisements also extremely inflated.
I was going to say, I wonder how much they're spending on paid advertising instead. And
Right.
that's not a smart on the wheel of
Well,
roulette. That is not the tactic that
yeah,
it depends. Everything depends, but mm, yeah.
yeah. Well, that was what this person was doing, is they said, hey, we actually stopped spending in our ad spend and just
Mm,
went to self-reported. But in my, again, like as you and I are just sharing here, yeah, no duh. Like don't like we know that's not a good place to spend your money. Like we know like it's about your go-to-market motion, it's about your brand. There's other like there's so much more that propels you getting deals and getting the right people. It's not spending ads. Like again, that's a 10, 15-year-old like process that was great back in the day when all this was getting going, but we know that's not where you need to be pumping a lot of your money. Where I mean, I say that because most companies are spending most of their money, most of their budget in those platforms.
yeah, it's really frustrating. It's a really crowded market, right? There's so many people advertising. There's only so much money can do there. It's so expensive, and usually the return just
Yeah.
isn't there.
And so within that example, that's, what I'm trying to get at is if you're comparing self-reporting to spending thousands for this person to millions of dollars for organizations, yeah, self-reporting might seem really nice because yeah, you're going to still get some decent insights from that. You're going to figure out where
Mhm.
to invest some money, such as events or certain websites as partners or whatever referrals. Yeah, 100% because you're spending less and it looks better on paper, but it's not necessarily that. Both of those are just not great channels.
No,
And so it's just
no,
not, you're comparing bad with bad or not good with, I'm not saying they're completely useless. There's a point to them, but like you can't compare the two because they're both not great points of comparison. Like that's just not good statistics, right?
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious though, getting to the wonderful ad world that we've ventured into. Uh, the cookie apocalypse that's happening, where a lot of businesses, and I would say more B2C, but even B2B organizations are pretty concerned about what's going to happen. What's your take on that?
Honestly, I was so much more stressed out about the changes Gmail made to their email sender policy than I was cookie apocalypse. And
Yeah.
the reason being is you're still going to get a lot of great insights about your website, consumption, conversion rates, all of the things you need to be tracking. I think what we've been alluding to is still relevant in that advertising is a tough thing to see a lot of profit from, and it's a hard thing to link together anyway. I think we're going to have to go to more multi-mix modeling and some correlation math as opposed to direct attribution. But we kind of have to do that on a lot of other things. So I'm really not freaking out about it because you can still get a lot of really great insights using first-party cookie data or server-side data.
Well, not only that, like people talk about like walled gardens, and the reality is so many platforms have direct integrations with ad platforms. Yep. So like what you're missing is like, I don't know, like maybe the like double click information of like how you're targeting people, but you're not missing out on like what's the search term. You're not missing out on like, you know what I mean? Like I just don't think you're missing out on a ton because of the first party cookie, these integrations that a lot of these attribution tools already have with these different ad platforms. It's like, I mean, it may be the push for that's why you buy these things, but again, there's I was talking to an individual that's like, yeah, LinkedIn has this API that you can just pull in like high level like information on people, and that's more media mix modeling, but nonetheless, you're just like, yeah, okay, totally, like it's there. So I guess to your point, do you think media mix is replacing multi-touch attribution, or do you think it's just more of that top of funnel, high level pursuit of understanding where do we invest and getting new customers? Like, where do you think it fits within the journey of attribution?
That's a great question.
B2B.
It's a great question. I don't think we've found the next thing yet, because I don't think either one of those are going to really do what the executive team's trying to do. And you read all these research studies. One was published recently in the Wall Street Journal about how the gap between the CMO and the CEO is just growing. The divide between the two is just growing. So I think we have some serious problems we should address before that. Like, I'm not convinced that we as marketers are great at using the data we have without multi-touch attribution. I'm not convinced that we speak the language of the rest of the business. There's no gold standard. Like, you talk about attribution, any model, and there's 100 different ways to do even weighted attribution. Well, how long are you looking ahead? Are you looking at after? Which touch points are you including? Are you looking at other departments? Are you just looking at marketing? It's frankly a bit of a mess. I think if you look at other departments, they have very rigid standards for what they report on, what they don't report on. I think we as marketers need to come to some kind of consensus. You know, maybe it's stage appropriate for the company's development or the tech stack they've invested in. I just think there are bigger fish to fry before we start thinking about, well, what's the next, buyer journey mapping thing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so let me ask you, is there an attribution model, or as you've rolled out and worked with CaliberMind, that you have found to kind of be the light bulb for customers, or how do you approach the conversation around attribution modeling?
I think the big thing I always emphasize is that different models answer different questions. You never combine the numbers. And if you can get away with not talking about specific dollar amounts and just talk about what's working when, you're in much better shape. Because anytime you go to the sales team and say marketing was responsible for, 500,000 of the pipe, you're just going to get into a big fight. So if we can truly look at this as an optimization tool that doesn't capture everything that we use to make better decisions for the things we can measure, that's great. But I think usually I push for an even weighted model if we are doing multi-touch attribution, because I've noticed that it's very difficult for people to wrap their heads around anything else. And usually when we're really pushing for weighting, there's some kind of ulterior motive behind that push. So for example, I've had a lot of companies tell me that they want to weigh in-person events and trade shows more heavily because they spend more money there. That's not how attribution should work. You should look at what's working and what isn't, and then go from there. And it's one tool in your toolbox. So I guess it was long-winded, but
no, I think it's a lot of good points there. because that's the theme so far is multi-touch attribution tools are sold to marketers, and marketers are using it to manipulate and create the story that they need to create. And that's, as you and I both know, like multi-touch attribution is great when it's everyone's involved, everyone's engaged. It's like ABM. Like ABM does not work if it's just one solo sales guy thinking he's going to go crush it and like go attack like one specific account. It's like, no, marketing needs to be involved, sales needs to be involved, like SD, like every group of the organization needs to be involved to go after this account, to properly target and do those things. Like that's same thing, multi-touch attribution. To truly understand this, you need to every player from beginning to end needs to be involved to partake of that process. Yeah, one thing I've done.
If that's how you're going to use it, though, right? Because sure. If you truly are just using it as a campaign optimization tool, sure, just keep it in marketing. Yeah. Don't share it with the other teams. I think the problem is, I don't think the vendors did themselves justice in selling it as a bit of a silver bullet and showing you every step of the buyer journey, because it can never do that. And then the other piece is exactly like you said. I'm just going to say it one more time, hopefully. If you're going to use it in front of the board or in front of the executive team as a representation of pipeline and bookings, you need to make that a cross-functional project. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's different ways to present that as we start talking about like the executives, but from a marketer's perspective, I'm curious to get your take. One thing I started to do as I worked with different companies was I actually took the monetary amount out.
Yep.
And I said, hey, you have 100 points to play with. 100 percentage points. And those will get distributed evenly. And so what it does though is that it removes the monetary, like, because your point, like everyone sees dollars and they're like, oh, we need to do this or we need to play with now. And from a statistical standpoint, dollars are like really hard to play with, because you could close, sales closes $1 million deal and the marketing's like, this is awesome, look what we did. And then, but when sales closes $1,000 deal, marketing's like, okay. And so it's like, no, just work with a 100-point system. So you can kind of determine what's going on, what are they engaging with, and it's more of a tally of like, this one has more points, this one has less points, and that measurement becomes a little bit more clear in that system, because you don't break outside of 100. You can't have more than 100 percentage points, right? So
right.
That's it's a little insight for those marketers looking at how do we measure this and have a little bit less of a bias as we look at this.
That's super smart. I think marketers would benefit more than just trying to state how many dollars what did by understanding conversion rates, average time to sale from different points in the sales cycle, and then figuring out which tactics in marketing work when. So if you can see that sales is behind on pipeline in week 3 of the quarter and turn it around, that's huge. Your board's going to love you. They don't care about the multi-touch attribution piece at that point, as long as you can prove you're making a significant impact.
Yep. Yeah. You mentioned, how companies have kind of did them a disservice by selling the silver bullet of sorts. I'm curious in that. Part of that though is the executives are saying, hey, we spent a very large chunk of change for y'all to figure something out. And so I think that the pressure also comes from that side as well. Yes, it's being sold as the silver bullet, but I also think there's this pressure of like, we got to figure out how we report on this attribution thing, because we just convinced our executives to, spend all this money on this.
Right.
And I don't think that's the right approach. I think what we've been saying kind of underlining is the insights in which you gather, you got to learn how to like articulate those insights, but it doesn't mean that you're articulating very specific attribution models, right, or credit or things of that sort.
Right. I mean, no CMO worth their salt is going to pull up all the website metrics, email open rates, click-through rates. They don't care. And I've felt that same pressure as a VP of marketing. I've had people walk up to me and say, I want to know for every dollar I put into each channel, how many are coming out. And it's not that concise formula. There's timelines. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of activities per every opportunity if you have a long sales cycle. And it's really hard to cut that opportunity into those little points. But what you can do is look at CAC and start making some really smart estimates that the rest of the business understand. And even if you just look at marketing investment and have what they're really looking for is how much do I need to spend to hit this number?
Yeah.
You don't have to tell them where you're spending each channel as long as you've proven you understand what works when, and you've proven in the past that you've positively impacted the direction of that pipeline and bookings number.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And that's one thing I really try to push with attribution time is how do we have these executive conversations? How do you present this information? Because again, multi-touch attribution is, I think, very helpful for marketers as well as the organization.
Yeah.
But when it comes to reporting on it, the department reports on it very differently than how you're going to report to the execs. And that's just, I'm so glad that we spent some time on that, because that's just such a vital piece to it. Even though the tool that you bought has all these cool dashboards.
Know your audience.
Don't show it to them. Yeah.
Yeah. What do they care about?
Yeah.
How much money you brought in and the profit margin. That's really all they care about. But one of the most powerful things of multi-touch attribution is pulling up a specific deal and showing the sales team what all happened, including their activity, just so they see you're not in this alone. We're all working on this together. And there's a bunch of stuff happening in the background that you don't know about. And that's okay. Like it all helps.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one thing I really thought was fun when I got into multi-touch attribution, especially as the first-party cookie, that the tool has that first-party cookie on the website, and you can see that, was sales doing all these things, and then you were able to come back in and say, here's all the web page visits that were happening while you were talking with them, right? They're not filling out forms anymore. They're not they're already engaged. They're doing all, but here's all the people, and here's all the job titles that were involved in that, right? And here's, and you can quickly see oh yeah, these had meaningful engagements. And now the next sales cycle is like, hey, what was that web page that you were looking at? Or like that this VP was looking at. Oh,
right.
It's this one. And you're like, oh great, I'm going to share that with this new, this. And those are the insights. Again, you're not giving that to the executive, but that's where you build that alignment with sales and you're able to start working together.
Right. And that's so much more valuable than assigning pennies and dollars to something, is being able to say, hey, did you know at this point in the sales cycle, our top 10 deals, these people were on it, and here's what they interacted with on our website.
Yep.
That's huge. So then they know what to proactively send them and what kind of content people are looking for at that point in time.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, and again, it all the more you're able to take away this gated asset concept, which I think most people have done away with, but
not all of them.
Still people do it. I still go to websites and it's still happening, and I'm like, okay, but it gets rid of it, and so then you're able to just again create a better user experience for the customer, or for the potential customer, in that. So what's one word to the wise as someone starts out on their journey for multi-touch attribution? They're probably not starting out where you did, with, maybe they are just the first touch or last touch, or, with a blown up campaign structure. Like what's a kind of word to the wise to those who start out?
This should be a long-term education campaign, and you need to do things cross-functionally. So I guess that's kind of two words, but these concepts are really hard to wrap your head around. You need to try it from a bunch of different angles and ask people to explain it back to you, because I can't tell you how many times I thought people got it because they're nodding their head and they said, oh, this is great. You ask them to explain it back and it's completely something different than, it's what they want in their head versus what's actually happening. And then final word, I guess that's 3 now. Make sure you're just as good at explaining what this does not do as what it does do. So you need to put, I don't know, flashing lights, signs, And, it's not going to measure word of mouth. We're going to have a hard time measuring podcasts. We're going to have a hard time doing this and that. And that's okay. We know that as marketers. If, we can see it's having an impact because when we started doing it, here's what happened to the numbers. So there's going to be some correlation still, but be just as good at explaining the shortcomings as you are at selling it.
Yeah. Great word. Great word. Well, Camela, thanks so much for being on Attribution Time today.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun to nerd out on this. I don't get to do that all the time.